You're learning with 9 to 5 English. Business English for the workplace. Hi, Tim here with another 9 to 5 English lesson. In today's lesson, we are going to have a look at how to talk about your family. In business and in life, everything is about relationships. And to build relationships, we often talk about our background and our personal life. Of course, you can't get too personal, but family is a topic that everyone loves to discuss. For most people, family is the reason they work so hard in the first place. And believe me, if you ask someone about their family, they'll feel good. Better yet, if you remember what they've told you about their family, they'll feel great. And if you show interest in someone's family, they'll probably show interest in yours. So how can you answer questions about your family? Well, children are always an interesting subject. If you've got kids, you'll surely understand. So, you can simply say how many children you have. You don't have to give too much detail, but you could mention whether they're boys or girls and how old they are. Or you might just say, 2 young children, or a teenaged son. Now, if you don't have children, you might just mention your spouse, which means your husband or wife. Or you might want to keep it really general. I mean, you could say something like, I come from a big family. And you might add something about where you're from or where you live. In this way, you're giving people an idea of who you are. How about a bit of practice talking about your family in these ways? We're going to give you some examples. After you hear each example, try repeating it yourself. Ready? Let's give it a go.
My wife and I have 2 boys aged 16 and 18.
Well, it's just my husband and I here in the States.
I've got a big family back in Edinburgh.
We've got 2 young children and a 3rd one on the way.
So when people ask an open-ended question about your family, they're probably wondering about your immediate family. That means your husband or wife and your kids. People don't want to know about your distant cousins. But people might ask about your parents or your family background. What exactly do you think people might want to know? Well, your parents' jobs may be interesting. So you could say something like, my father is a doctor and my mother is a teacher. If that sounds a bit boring, then how about mentioning some special accomplishment? Like, my mother invented a new type of car tire. Okay, maybe your mother didn't invent a tire, but it's just an example of interesting family history. And besides special accomplishments, sometimes in your family history, a particular job is common through different generations. In that case, you can say you come from a long line of engineers, for example, or a long line of salespeople. or whatever job it is that runs in your family. Now, what if the family has a business? Well, you can tell people what type of business, and you could even mention how long your family has run that business. These kinds of details about family, especially their jobs or business, are interesting to people. And they might also make you look good. I mean, if your family has been successful in business, people will naturally think that you've got talent too. Now, it's your turn to try using these expressions. Just like before, you'll hear some examples. After each example, you can repeat what you hear. Let's begin.
My dad is an engineer and my mom is in education.
I come from a long line of military folks.
My father worked at the first VW plant in Mexico.
Our family has run a clothing store for 3 generations.
So, did you hear how that worked? There were some interesting details in those examples, right? And notice that we say run a business, which just means to operate a business. Now that we've practiced some of these expressions, let's hear how this sounds in an actual conversation. We're going to listen to Anne asking John about his family. And John is going to talk about his children and his family in the U.S.
So, is it just you and your wife here in Paris?
No, we've got our son and a daughter with us.
Aw, that must be nice. But I imagine you miss your family back home.
I sure do. I've got a pretty big family back in the States.
How did that sound? John mentioned his son and daughter and his big family back in the States. We can use that expression, back in, to talk about the place we originally come from. Now, it's your turn to practice. We'll repeat the dialogue, but this time we're going to beep out John's words. You will have to say those parts yourself. Remember, first you'll mention your kids, then you'll say that you have a big family in the U.S. Here we go.
So, is it just you and your wife here in Paris? Aw, that must be nice. But I imagine you miss your family back home.
Okay, so that's all for this lesson. We've had a look at both talking about your immediate family and talking about your parents or family background. And that wraps up our series of lessons on talking about your background. By now, you should be comfortable telling people about where you're from, your education, your career, and your family. Until our next lesson, so long and happy learning.